sweeping hearths and scrubbing floors, minding babies and hauling wood. House servants performed the endless tasks that kept plantations and homes running. Though their work was often tedious, it placed them close to their enslavers. This proximity provided meager benefits like hand-me-down clothing, but also exposed women to abuse. Apprenticed from childhood, house servants inherited their parents' duties, be that serving food with discretion or gracefully keeping up appearances. While their lives differed from field workers, enslaved house servants faced no less hardship. Their days brought rare comforts but constant toil. Welcome to Bizarre History. Today we examine a day in the life of a house slave for the rich. Day in and day out, enslaved house servants toiled endlessly to maintain the grand estates of their masters. Forced to cater to the whims and fancies of the household, their lives were consumed by grueling labor and endless drudgery. In larger homes with many enslavers, their duties became specialized. Some cooked, some cleaned, while many waited on their masters hand and foot. Smaller households afforded no such divisions, and the enslaved were obligated to shoulder their responsibilities themselves, always at the beck and call of those who claimed ownership over them. Sleep and rest came intermittently, rarely fully. Yet even as they worked from dawn until dusk to prepare meals, launder clothing, and maintain spotless interiors, their enslavers saw only imagined sloth, incompetence, and reluctance. For the enslaved, there was no respite, no comfort, no control over their days. The mundane, back-breaking work of Thomas Jefferson's house servants at his palatial Monticello estate reflected the drudgery and hardship inherent in their bondage. Young children hauled heavy loads of firewood to keep over 11 hearth fires burning through the cold months. The fireplaces required endless sweeping, blacking of andirons, and removal of ashes. Houseboys and maids lugged buckets of water to fill bedroom ewers and pitchers, later emptying the dirty water. They cleaned the shoes of all who entered and dealt with the foul contents of chamber pots. The daily toil of keeping Monticello functioning fell upon the shoulders of Jefferson's enslaved people. Their labor was endless, unrecognized, and unrewarded. One of the most distinctive and tragic aspects of slavery was the plight of the household servants. Unlike other enslaved people who worked in the fields or the factories, they had to face the constant presence and scrutiny of their white masters. This exposed them to a greater risk of sexual exploitation and violence, especially the women and girls. Many of them bore children who resembled their oppressors, such as Sally Hemings, who served Thomas Jefferson and had at least 6 of his offspring. The evidence of this widespread abuse was revealed by the 1860 census, which recorded 460,000 people of mixed race, mostly in the South. They were the living proof of the horrors that black women and girls endured under slavery. It was not easy to maintain a clean and tidy house, especially in the summer. The servants had to work hard every day, sweeping the floors with brooms, and then scrubbing and waxing them with cloths and brushes. They had to do this more often than usual because the open windows let in many insects and dust that dirtied the floors. The windows had no screens to keep them out, so the servants had no choice but to clean again and again. But that was not all. The house had many expensive art pieces and furniture that needed to be protected from the dust and insects. The servants had to cover them with thin sheets of gauze or linen, and only uncover them when the house was in use or when guests came over. This was another tedious and time-consuming task that the servants had to do regularly. The enslaved laundress had a tedious and exhausting task of keeping the clothes and linens of their enslavers clean and fresh. They had to go through a long process of washing, rinsing, drying, and ironing that spanned over several days. They had to carry heavy buckets of water, boil it over fire, and dump it after each wash. They had to wait for the clothes to dry, which could take longer in the cold seasons. They had to iron the clothes with hot irons that could burn their hands. The enslaved ladies' maids and valets had a different but equally demanding role of maintaining the personal appearance and belongings of their enslavers. They had to wash the delicate and expensive garments of their enslavers, such as lace and silk, and mend them if needed. They had to remove any stains and dust from the suits and clothes of their male enslavers, and air them out regularly. They had to sew any buttons or patches that came loose. They had to organize and tidy up the closets and drawers of their enslavers and to keep track of their jewelry and accessories. The enslaved personal body servants had to attend to the grooming and hygiene of their enslavers. They had to clean and polish the soft-soled shoes that their enslavers wore indoors. They had to wash their male enslavers' hair with soap and water and shave their beards with sharp razors. They had to make or adorn the hats that their female enslavers wore on special occasions. The seamstresses had a lot of work to do. They not only made and mended sheets and towels, but also took care of the clothing needs of the children and women. They had to fix holes, tears, and worn-out parts, and sometimes even change the shape or style of the garment. They also had to provide clothing for the rest of the enslaved people, who often wore ragged and torn clothes. It was a hard and tedious job, especially when they had to meet the expectations of their masters. One such master was George Washington, who owned a plantation called Mount Vernon. He kept a close eye on the seamstresses' work and expected them to produce a certain number of shirts every week. He was not pleased when he found out that they had failed to meet their quota. He wrote a letter to his overseer on December 23, 1792, in which he singled out one seamstress, Caroline, who had made only 5 shirts instead of 9. He quoted his wife, Mrs. Washington, who said that 9 shirts with shoulder straps and good sewing was their usual task. He then warned that he would send some of the seamstresses to work in the fields if they did not improve their performance. From a young age, enslaved children in the house had to take care of white infants and toddlers who were barely older than them. They were called baby minders or nurses, and their duty was to protect their white masters from dangers such as fire, stairs, wells, and animals. Many of them stayed with their white companions until they became adults, serving them as personal attendants. Enslaved wet nurses also sacrificed their bodies and emotions to feed the babies of white women who did not want or could not breastfeed their own offspring. Sometimes a mature enslaved woman was assigned to be the general caretaker of white children until they reached adulthood. The butlers and cooks had to keep in touch with their enslavers throughout the day, informing them of their duties, the number of guests for each meal, and the ingredients required for the various dishes, which they had to plan ahead of time. The butlers were in charge of the house staff, calling them for meals and sometimes serving them in the dining room and welcoming the guests at the door. They had to know the social rank of each guest, whether they were relatives, officials, or prominent locals, so that they could escort them to the suitable room in the house. The cook was the boss of the kitchen, with 1 or more scullions under his or her command. The scullions had to do whatever the cook said, as well as killing, plucking, cleaning and cooking chickens, peeling and washing vegetables, tending to the fires, scrubbing pots and pans, stirring pots, turning spits, and learning the kitchen skills that might help them become cooks someday. The kitchen staff prepared the main meal of the day, along with breakfast and a late tea or supper. They also had to cook special meals for any sick people in the household, as they believed that they needed different foods. They knew their place and their role. They were the servants who had to face the whites every day in the public rooms of the house, the dining room where they served the food and drinks but never tasted them, the parlor where they played music and entertained but never enjoyed. They had to be alert and attentive, but also invisible and silent. The enslavers did not want them to hear their secrets or opinions. They did not want them to have any thoughts or feelings of their own. They only wanted them to obey and serve. The houseboys and maids carrying wood or laundry avoided eye contact with the family or guests. They moved to the side of the hallways as if they were not there. They were the unseen and unheard, living in a world of servitude. The enslaved house servants at Monticello did not enjoy any privileges over their fellow enslaved field hands when it came to food. They received the same meager rations of corn and meat every week as recorded in the plantations documents. Working in the kitchen did not give them any access to the leftovers from the white family's table. The woman enslaver was careful to measure out the exact amount of food needed for each dish and to save the remaining food for later use. The kitchen staff had to find other ways to supplement their diet, such as growing their own vegetables and raising chickens for eggs and meat. Henrietta King, a former slave from West Point, recalled in an oral history that the field hands actually had more food than the house servants because her enslaver was very stingy. She also remembered the terrible beating she got as a child for taking a piece of candy from the kitchen. The enslavers were always suspicious of theft, but it was hard to know how often or how much the enslaved people stole. The house servants faced constant pressure to feed themselves and their families, and they had different methods of preparing their meals. Some enslavers would give some of the rations to the cook to make a shared dinner for all the servants. Others would allow their servants to cook within their own family networks. While Jefferson and his men were busy harvesting wheat at Monticello in June 1794, the women of the Hemmings family remained in the mansion, performing the essential and demanding tasks of running a household. They were the backbone of the domestic service, skilled and efficient in their work. They catered to the needs of the white family and guests, cooked and served food, cleaned and laundered clothes, and looked after the children. They managed the supplies of firewood, slops, and foodstuffs, kept the floors tidy, and arranged beds. They worked tirelessly and invisibly without recognition or reward. They were enslaved women, but they were also mothers, sisters, daughters, and wives. They had their own stories, hopes, and dreams. If you want more of history's long-held secrets and darkest confessions, hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. From us at Bizarre History, thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.